Baltimore County in the Office of Budget and Finance. This webinar is being recorded, and I'm going to give Ashley Elliott a moment to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Elliott. I am the Program Administrator for the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund. I'm also the County Liaison for the Community Reinvestment and Repair Commission. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. And we're also on with Bibios La Rochelle and Elizabeth Meadows. They're all supporting this grant's work, so we're very happy to have them on today as well. So I do know online, I want to lead with this, that this was listed as a different topic. We did get that updated. We've been working on updating that, and that update was posted this morning. So if you attended our last webinar, we are going to be covering the same information in this webinar. You are more than welcome to stay for the duration of this webinar if you attended the last one, but I did want to let you know that up front so that you weren't confused or had any questions about that as we go through. And as Bibios said over here in the chat, throughout the presentation, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. I know we will try to respond to them in the chat as we are able, and we will respond to all questions at the end of the presentation. All right, we have a lot to cover today, so we are going to go ahead and dive in. If we can, perfect. So just to give you an overview of our agenda today, we're going to start with an overview of the program. We're then going to talk about eligibility requirements, as well as funding priorities and prohibitions. We're going to go through the application in its entirety. We are going to talk about the budget for your application. We're going to go over the scoring and review process, so how we are looking at your applications and how they are being scored. We're going to look at the application for financial assistance, which is separate from the application to this program, but is a document that you will need to submit. If you've applied for a Baltimore County grant before, you're familiar with the application for financial assistance. We're going to go over the risk assessment. We're going to go over deadlines. And then, like I said, at the end, we will have time for questions. Let's go ahead and dive into the overview. So the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, which you'll hear me refer to throughout this webinar, and you'll see abbreviated as the CRRF, was established under the Cannabis Reform Act, and it allocates a portion of adult use cannabis tax revenue to local jurisdictions to support community-based initiatives. So this is funding that comes from the state of Maryland to the county, and the county is distributing those funds. Go on to the next slide. Counties are required to adopt laws establishing the purpose for which the money received from the fund may be used. We did pass Bill 3724, which you can find on the county's website, and that established the Commission and the Special Revenue Fund for these efforts. And we also have the Community Reinvestment and Repair Commission, which will make funding recommendations. So, getting into eligibility, per the Maryland State Office of Social Equity, which you will also hear me refer to and see abbreviated throughout this as the OSE, funds from the CRRF program can only be used for community-based initiatives, and they have to benefit low-income communities or community-based initiatives that serve disproportionately impacted areas. And those are defined within the Cannabis Reform Act. So you can be a nonprofit or a for-profit, and you must serve Baltimore County residents to be eligible. We will be giving preference to organizations who have already demonstrated work in the affected communities and zip codes. You must be in good standing with the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. You can find a link to their website here. We will be posting these slides online. And really, when we say good standing, there is a certificate that you can purchase. We do not need you to purchase that. We just need to see a screenshot of the web page showing that you are in good standing. Can we go back to the previous slide? Thank you. If you are an organization who has an organizational budget of over $1 million, we do encourage you to subcontract with smaller local-based organizations. This is not a requirement. This is a question that came up in our last webinar, but we do encourage it. We are hoping to get these funds out to small organizations, so we would like to see you working together. If you are including subgrantees in your project, you must include letters from the subgrantees that detail the nature of that partnership and the services that they will be providing. And you do not need to be affiliated with any cannabis-related business or activities to apply. Now we can go on to the next slide. So our funding priorities. Awards are going to be made to programs and projects based on the best interest of the county and the furtherance of CRRF funding goals that address Baltimore County's community reinvestment and repair fund priorities and either serve populations in the target zip codes listed here, those are the zip codes identified by the Maryland Office of Social Equity, or that serve populations in low-income communities. And we've defined low-income communities as communities within a qualified census tract as designated by the U.S. Treasury and HUD. You can find information on qualified census tracts at the link there. And if you do not serve a population in a target zip code or a population in a low-income community, you will not be eligible for these funds. Now, this is a question that came up in the last webinar, and we'll be posting FAQs online as well. If the population that you are serving lives within those areas, you are eligible, even if the service is being provided in an area that does not necessarily fall within these target zip codes. So you're also welcome to look at the population that you are serving and the zip codes with which that population comes from. We can go ahead to the next one. So we also have a couple of funding priority areas. These come from the Office of Social Equity, as well as a community survey that was distributed to Baltimore County residents. That survey is still available online if you're interested. So the funding priorities are mental health and harm reduction, education and after-school programs, housing and unhoused prevention services, re-entry and reintegration, adult professional development, entrepreneurship and economic development, nonprofit training and management to support BIPOC community leaders, and workforce development and training. So as a reminder, you must address at least one of these funding priorities, and you must be in either a HUD designated area or one of those zip codes identified by the OSE to be eligible for funds. Let's talk a little bit about funding prohibition. There are two specific prohibitions to these funds. Number one, the funds cannot be spent on any law enforcement activities or agencies. And number two, the funds cannot be used to supplant funding for pre-existing local government programs. And you see I have this underlined here because I want to be very clear that this applies to government programs only. If you are a nonprofit, if you are a small business, and you're supplanting funds for a program that your organization has been doing, that is fine. It is just governments that fall under this prohibition. So I wanted to be very clear on that. I know that people would likely have questions. So that only applies if you are applying for funds for a government program, which we do not expect. Okay, so now let's dive into the application. This is just the top line summary of the application here. You'll see that there are points listed for each section, and we'll get a little bit more into what that means when we talk about application scoring. But we're going to go through the project summary, your organizational capacity and structure, your alignment to CRRF priorities, the description of the need and project location, the project description, performance measures and project goals, your sustainability plan, your budget, all of the supporting documentation that you will need to include with your application, as well as funding priority considerations and renewal. So let's dive into what each of those sections actually looks like. So at the top here, we have the application overview. This section does not get points. It is the logistical information that we need for your organization. So we do still need you to fill it out. In here, you're just providing the basics, your organization's name, address, your point of contact, etc. Down here at the bottom, you'll see your total project costs and your project title. Now within here, you see application point of contact and point of contact name for project. If the person submitting the application is not the person who is going to be managing the project, we ask that you list both of their names. If the person submitting the application is also the person who is going to be managing the project, you can submit it as just the application point of contact. All right, let's go on to the project summary. So this is the first thing that you will be providing to us. This portion is also not scored, but we will be checking the rest of the application against your summary and make sure that the detail provided throughout your application aligns with and supports this overview. Can we go back one slide real quick? So this portion is not scored, but we are asking you to provide that high-level summary, summarizing your program, your project, and its overarching goals. Now we can go ahead to the next slide. So your first section that will be scored, again, this section is worth 15 points. Is your organizational, oh, sorry, I think we went too far ahead. We should be one further back here. Oh, we might be having an issue with PowerPoint, so bear with us for a second, folks. Thank you for your patience as we get this resolved. There we go. Perfect. Can we go back to slide 12?
Okay. Can you guys see?
We can. There is a small gray box on the screen. There we go. It disappeared. We can go back one slide. Oh, we might have lost Ashley here. I wonder if there is an internet issue. All right, folks, give me one second. I'm going to pull up this on my side. I think we're having an internet connection issue here, so give me just a moment. All right, folks, hopefully you can see this. We're going to skip ahead here. Thank you for bearing with us. And we're going to pick right up where we left off. So this section is worth 15 points. We are defining organizational capacity as your organization's history of work and the experiences and the skills of your organization's leadership and relevant employees. As we go through the application, I am not going to read through each of the questions, but I am going to tell you a little bit about how we are going to score them. So for number one here, we are going to see if you provided a clear and concise description of the organization's history and structure. For number two, we're seeing if you provided the information and if your capacity seems sufficient to carry out the project. For number three, we're seeing if you clearly and adequately explained either your history providing similar services or their organizational capacity to successfully implement the program, and does that capacity seem sufficient to carry out the project? That is a through line you're going to see throughout our review, and what we're looking for when we're scoring is, does the capacity seem sufficient to carry out the project? Do we believe that you are going to be able to carry out your project as you have detailed it within your application? You can also find our scoring sheet online on the webpage, and it details all of this information as well. So for number four, we're seeing if you clearly and adequately explained either your history providing similar services or your organizational capacity to successfully implement the program, and seeing if that capacity seems sufficient to carry out the program. And finally, at number five, does the project align with the overall mission of the organization? And did they clearly tie the project back to the mission? So now we're going to talk about alignment to CRRF priorities. This section is worth 13 points. So for number one, you're going to have to identify at least one, but no more than three of the priority areas. And what we are going to be scoring there is, does the project described align with the priority areas identified? And do you identify only three or fewer priority areas? Again, you must identify at least one, otherwise your project will be ineligible for funding. For number two, do you make a strong connection between the project outcomes and the CRRF priority areas identified? And for number three, do you identify actionable strategies for reducing and eliminating race equity issues? And again, that through line, does the capacity seem sufficient to carry out those strategies? Description of need and project location. So this section, again, is worth 13 points. And the first question is the second highest scoring question in this application. You can get up to 10 points for that first question. So for that one, what we are going to be looking for is, did you clearly describe the need, the population, and the problem to be addressed? Do you offer detail as to how that need and population has been impacted by the war on drugs and or drug policy? And do you use supporting data, and does it support the need for their project? So we do have a link to the Baltimore County Social Determinants of Health data dashboard in here that you're welcome to use to find data information. We also encourage you to use any other sources that you may be familiar with. You are not required to use the Social Determinants of Health data dashboard. We simply offer it as a resource. For number 2, we're checking to see if you provided the requested information. Again, if you are not providing this service in one of the target zip codes or in a low-income community, as defined by U.S. Treasury and HUD, then your program is not eligible for funds. Again, that can be for the population being served as well. And then we're going to ask you if you are already providing services in that geographic area. Project descriptions. So as you can imagine, this section is worth 26 points and is the highest scoring section of the application. The first question here is worth 15 of the possible 26 points for this section. So for that one, and this one I am going to read out, we're going to have you provide a detailed description of the activities to be carried out with grant funds during the project period, including the type, frequency, quantity, and quality of services that will be delivered. So when we review that, what we are going to be looking for is seeing if you clearly, concisely, and consistently explain what activities the grant funds will be used for and when and how often services will be delivered. We want to understand if you're paying for salaries, for example, if you are paying for resources for a program that you are going to be carrying out. And again, we will want to make sure that that matches that program summary that you provided at the very top of your application. For number 2, do you identify appropriate staff to carry out the program? And does that capacity seem sufficient to carry out these strategies? For number 3, again, if you do not have a collaborator, that is fine. You will simply put not applicable for this section. We ask that you not leave it blank. And that will not take away any points from you if you do not have a collaborator that you are working with. If you do have a collaborator, we're going to be looking to see if you describe a good working relationship between your organization and that organization. And we want to make sure it's clear how sub-vendors will be working on the project. For number 4, we'll be looking at whether or not your outreach strategies identified seem sufficient to reach your target population. And for number 5, we're going to be looking at that timeline and see if it's sufficient to carry out the program and if there's sufficient detail in that timeline so that we can understand how and when the project will be implemented. Performance measures and project goals. This section is worth 9 points. Projects are required to track the number of county residents that are being served. So that might be individuals or households, whatever makes the most sense for your program. What we're going to be looking at there is, does that number provided seem attainable based on your program description, your past performance, and your outreach strategy? For number 2, we would like you to provide some additional metrics as well. And we're going to be looking at whether or not those metrics align with the overall project goals that you have described. We're going to see if your data gathering method provided seems sufficient to track that information. And for number 3, if you're not familiar with SMART goals, they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We do have a link in here. As I said, we'll be posting these slides online for guidance on developing SMART goals. And we're looking for whether or not you identify at least one goal and whether or not those goals that you have identified align with the other information provided, such as your metrics, your residents served, and your project description. Now, I want to be clear that if you are not perfectly within the SMART goals format, you are not necessarily going to lose points for this. However, we are asking that you be specific with your goals. You give us some numbers that you are looking to work with. So for example, the number of Baltimore County residents up at the top, that's a specific number. We want to understand how you plan on accomplishing the goals that you have set for yourself. That is the most important thing here in number 3. Sustainability plan. This section's worth 2 points, and all of those 2 points are in question 1. So we're going to ask you to describe how the project will be sustained after the grant period. However, we understand that some of you may be implementing projects that you don't plan to be sustained after the grant period. So if you are not planning to sustain the program after the grant period, we ask you to describe how your program will build the capacity of the target population. And we're going to see whether you clearly and adequately either explain your sustainability strategy or your strategy to build capacity, and whether or not that plan seems reasonable and able to be carried out. Like I said, all of your points are in this first question here. This second question is simply for our tracking purposes. Budget, we're going to look at the budget in a couple of slides as well, but this is just the overview of that. So this section is worth 13 points. The first question is the third highest scoring question in this application. You can earn up to 8 points for that question. And what we are going to be looking for is, does your budget provided align with your project narrative? If you've said in your project narrative that you're funding salaries, we want to see salaries in your budget. If there's something that appears in your budget that does not appear in your narrative, we are going to have questions, and that will lose you points on this part of the application. So your budget must demonstrate a 10% monetary or in-kind match. If you're doing an in-kind match, you must attach a document demonstrating how the rate for in-kind services or products was determined. And grant funds may fund no more than 50% of executive and or administrative salaries. However, direct service staff can be fully funded by this grant. So we're going to check to see if you adequately identify a 10% match, if you're following all of the funding requirements, so no more than 50% of executive administrative salaries, no funds towards police programs, and does the budget seem sufficient to carry out your project? And then for number 2 here, we're going to be seeing, does your organization appear to have the capacity to manage a program with the budget provided? Your supporting documents, this section's worth 9 points. All of these will be attached with your application. So the first one is the Baltimore County application for financial assistance. As I said at the top of this, we are going to be looking at that application for financial assistance in its entirety as well. That is required for anyone applying for a grant from Baltimore County, no matter the program. So if you have applied for a grant, you will have seen that before. There are a couple of documents that go along with that application for financial assistance for it to be considered complete. That includes the latest copy of your financial statement. The type of financial statement you're submitting will depend on your organizational size. We have an example list here. You'll also include a copy of your current board of directors list, or if you're a corporation, please supply the names of your major shareholders. So this will be a question within the application for financial assistance that you are welcome to just complete in line there. Again, we'll talk about this on that slide. But if that does not fit within that part of the application, please submit a separate document detailing that information. And that SSTAT certificate of good standing that we talked about earlier, we have the link here as well, or the information for the link. You can search your business entity, and as we said, a screenshot indicating good standing is sufficient. We do not need you to go through and pay for that certificate, but we do need to see that you are in good standing. If you are not in good standing with SSTAT, you will also not be able to receive funds until you are in good standing with SSTAT. We're also asking you to submit an organizational chart that shows us how your organization functions, who the leadership is, who reports to whom, the structure of your organization. We'll need you to submit a W-9. This is so that if you are chosen for funds, we can input you as a supplier within our payment system. We'll ask you to submit the risk assessment, which we will dive into, and we'll ask you to submit an affidavit. Again, if you are subcontracting with other organizations, you must have letters of support or MOUs with those subcontractors identifying their support and what they will be doing. Not attaching any of these forms can result in removing points from your application. Finally, we have funding priority considerations. These can only gain you additional points. You cannot lose any points in this section, but you can earn up to 6 additional points. So you may include up to 3 letters of support. They are completely optional. You can get 1 point per letter of support submitted. If your organization is a minority or woman-owned business with an MBE certification from the state of Maryland, and you attach your certificate, then you can get an additional point for that. For folks who are not businesses but are nonprofits, if you are minority or woman-owned, please let us know, and we will give you a point for that. And we want to know if your organization's leadership was impacted by the war on drugs. If so, we're asking you to please provide a brief impact statement. And as long as you provide that impact statement, you will be getting an additional point. We're also, again, asking here at the end if you plan to renew at the end of the grant period, We cannot guarantee renewal of funds at this time, but similar to the question we asked earlier in this, we want to gather data on which grantees would be interested in renewing if that is an option. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about our budget form. And I apologize because this is broken down onto 2 pages, otherwise it would have been very small and hard to read. So this is the budget form that you will be submitting. This is just the overview page. So at the top here, you'll be including all of your basic information, your project title, your contact person, your email. And then you see down here, we have the budget category. You're going to be showing us not only the Baltimore County funds, you're also going to show us any non-county funds. Again, you are required to show a 10% match, so that should be included in here, whether that comes from in-kind sources or from other funding. This will provide an overview, this summary page of what the funds are being used for. There are subsequent sheets within this document as well. You can find this online on our webpage. It's an Excel form. And those include other salary, equipment, and anticipated sources that sort of break these down into further detail. You'll be demonstrating, as I said, all of the funds that are going towards this project, not just county funds. This is simply the bottom of that form, just so that you get an idea of it. And I do have here, and I apologize, this shows up a little smaller than I anticipated it would, but this is the anticipated sources of fund sheet in the document as well, where you will provide further detail about your funding sources. All of the information here should align with what is in your budget summary page. All of the information that is in your budget should align with the project as described in your project narrative. You can apply for a minimum of $25,000 and a maximum of $200,000. Again, you must provide a 10% monetary or in-kind match. If you're choosing to provide an in-kind match, please provide a math statement for how the rate for in-kind services or products was determined. Again, you may fund no more than 50% of executive and or administrative salary. Direct service staff can be fully funded. And if you are using an indirect cost rate, you are welcome to use the federal de minimis indirect cost rate of 15%. Complete applications are going to be reviewed by the grants team. That includes myself as well as a couple other team members. A scoring committee is going to review and score complete applications, and applications must meet a minimum threshold of 70 out of 100 points to be considered for funding. So this is where all of those points that we were discussing throughout the application come in. Complete and scored applications are going to be shared with the CRRC. Again, that's the commission, who is going to make funding recommendations. Those funding recommendations are going to be based on the best interests of the county. So that does not mean that necessarily the highest scoring applications are absolutely going to be funded. We are going to be looking at things such as disbursement of services across the county, making sure we have a variety of services being provided that hit different funding priority areas. We're going to dive into the application for financial assistance. Again, if you've applied for a grant from Baltimore County before, you'll be familiar with this form. This form is the only document that's going to go to the County Grants Review Committee, the County Council, and the county auditors for review. So it is very important that it gives a high-level overview of your project. The application that you're filling out that we went through before this gives us all of that nitty-gritty detail. This is meant to be a summary. So it starts off here. Similarly, you're giving us your name or your organization's name, your address, your telephone. We're asking if you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. We're going to ask for your councilmanic and legislative district. Now, this may be where you are providing services, if that is in the county, or the population that you are serving for that councilmanic and legislative district. But these must be within the county. For proposed use of requested funds and project completion date, this can be very similar to that summary at the top of your application. We want to know how you're using the funds, again, what sort of things they're funding, whether that's salaries, equipment, etc. And we want to know when the project is planned to be completed by. Getting into the meat of this is the total project cost. So going back to our budget form, that's going to be that far right column from the budget form. So this is how much all of it costs, not just what you are requesting from Baltimore County. Then to the right of that, you're going to have the amount that you are requesting from Baltimore County. And then you're going to show us your other funding sources over to the right. All of these numbers in amount here, amount requested from Baltimore County, and total project cost. Amount and amount requested from Baltimore County should always add up to total project cost, and all of these numbers should match your budget form. Again, you are required to provide a 10% match, so we'll definitely need to see that in your other funding sources. We're asking you to attach the latest copy of your financial statements and just provide information here on what type of financial statement you are providing. For number 7, you're required to list all county, federal, state, and any other grants, such as private grants or loans, awarded to you within the current and last 2 fiscal years. County fiscal years from July 1st to June 30th. If you cannot fit all of that information in here, that is fine. Please just attach a separate sheet and say in here, see attached. I'm going to ask you if there's a need for additional grant funds in this or future years to complete the project. Please respond to that with at least a minimum level of detail of why you would need grant funds, if you would. For number 8A, if you have applied for grants from other county agencies this year. Now, this is basically for funds that you have requested but have not received. If you have received them, they should be up in that former section of lists of grants received. But if you've applied for something from Baltimore County, you will include that in here, the amount you requested and what the request was for. Excuse me. For number 9, we will be asking you if you are using this to make improvements to or buy equipment which will benefit real property. This is more of a capital thing than anything else. This would be relevant if you are purchasing HVAC for a building. More likely than not, you are not going to be completing this section, since that will more often than not be relevant to the funding priority areas of this grant program. In this little box here that you see a highlight, the county is filling this part out. You do not need to fill that out. However, there is more below it that we will need you to fill out. And that gets back into this, which we talked about. If you are other than an individual, supply the names of the officers and board members. Again, if you can fit everything in here in line, fantastic, please do. If you need to attach a separate document, then please attach a separate document. If you are a corporation, supply the names of your major shareholders. Again, if you need to provide an attachment, please do so. We're going to ask you to list the names of any closely related organizations, as well as any grants or loans awarded to or applied for by those organizations. So if you operate under a larger umbrella organization, we would need to know about that larger umbrella organization. Getting to the last bits of the application for financial assistance here, we're going to ask you about those in-kind services. This section should match what you provided up at the top of this form for other sources of funds, for in-kind funds. And again, this should match the information provided in your application and your budget. So we're looking for a math statement here for how you calculated those in-kind services, as well as the total for those in-kind services. We're looking for the population to be served by the project, which you will put in your application. You can copy some of that information over. Again, this is the high-level summary, so we're looking for a location, potentially an age range if that is something that will be relevant to your project. And then we're asking about the anticipated benefit to the community. How will this benefit Baltimore County? Finally, we're going to ask you how you learned of the county's available grant and loan programs, and then we will need you to sign this with your name, title, and date. So we are nearing the end here, folks. Your risk assessment. This is available online, and I want to be clear that the risk assessment is not going to be used to score your application or determine if you are eligible for funding. The risk assessment is only used to develop a monitoring plan if your organization is chosen for funding. So I know it can be very scary if you are filling out the risk assessment for your organization, and you determine that your organization is classified per the risk assessment as high risk. That does not mean that you are not going to get funds. What it does mean is you will have more frequent monitoring if you are chosen for funding. Deadlines. This is the important stuff here. So you must complete and submit all of the required grants application documents by midnight on March 15th to grsigrants@baltimorecounty.md.gov. Please ensure that all of your forms are fully complete and attached prior to submission. Please submit them in only one email to us. If your application is incomplete or late, it may not be reviewed or scored. Again, submit that to grsigrants@baltimorecounty.md.gov. And I apologize, this was left over from the last webinar and we neglected to leave that out. So this is the last webinar we are hosting as of now, but we will be posting FAQs online, and you can send any questions as well to grsigrants@baltimorecounty.md.gov. That is being monitored during every working day, and we were working to get back to people as quickly as possible. The final reminders that I have for this program is all of your documents should tell the same story and have the same information at varying levels of detail. Your grant application should align with your budget and your application for financial assistance. So again, we want to make sure that the narrative that you have given us in your grant application matches what you have outlined in your budget. We want to make sure that the summary at the top of your grant application matches what is in your narrative, and all of that matches the application for financial assistance. Again, if you do not submit all of the required documents or your documents are incomplete, you may not be considered for funding. And we are going to go ahead into questions, and I will simply ask, since I cannot see the comments, if Ashley or Bibios could read any unanswered questions to me so that I can answer them and possibly jump back to slides if needed. That would be incredibly helpful. All right, well, let me end the slideshow here.
Sorry, Gabby. I'm looking through the questions to see what Bibios hasn't answered.
No worries. And okay, so I see from Chris Snyder, should this be submitted as one PDF or separated attachments? These can be submitted as separate attachments, but please just submit them in one email. I see someone is still not clear on the timeline of the grant. Can you clarify your question regarding the timeline of the grant? The timeline right now for applications is they are due March 15th. This grant is for one fiscal year. So if that does not answer your question, we are not certain when funds are going to be distributed at this point. We need to see how many applications we receive and how long it's going to take us to process those applications. We are hoping to begin getting information out to potential grantees in the spring. Let me see. You can apply for up to $200,000 and a minimum of $25,000 for how much is available. We're going to determine how much is funded based on the number of applications received and the quality of applications received. We do not have a number decided for total grant funds in the pool of funding at this time. Again, we're going to be making that decision based on the number and quality of applications received. Thank you. For the organizational chart, are you referring to how the business runs now or how it will run if approved? We're asking for how your business functions at this moment. So for example, if you have a board of directors that your organization reports to or gets guidance from, we want to understand that and see how that works. The final grant report will be due usually within a month of your grant closing. That will be in your grant agreement if you are chosen for funds. If I have missed any questions in the chat, please repost them here so I can make sure they are captured. Again, we will be posting FAQs on the webpage.
Did we acknowledge the one on the 15% cap?
No. What is that question?
Okay, they're asking, can we explain what's included in the 15% cap on indirect costs?
So indirect costs are anything that is not directly funding your project, but is necessary for your organization to keep itself functional. So for example, that might be rent for a building, things such as that. That can be included as part of your 15% de minimis indirect cost rate.
I think you may have answered this on submitting separate attachments.
Yes, that one we have answered. So the timeline for the recipient to use awarded funds, again, these funds will be for one fiscal year. We can add more information in the FAQs about the specific timeline, similar for the estimated date range as well. Again, we are hoping to have more information out to potential grantees that we are hoping to fund in the spring. Is it possible to apply for funding for a specific time period? So 228 here, as is given in the example. Again, this is funding for one fiscal year. It will just be for one fiscal year. So funds will not be able to go until 2028. Yes, if you're applying for 200,000, your overall budget would be 220,000, showing that 10% match. For submitting, we would appreciate the opportunity to confirm that our proposed approach aligns with your current funding priorities. Would it be possible to schedule a brief conversation to review the concept? We're not able to schedule direct conversations with folks at this time, as we don't really want to give anyone a leg up over other grantees. So we encourage you to really read the funding priorities, review information that we have on the webpage, and review information put out by the Office of Social Equity to determine whether or not your project is considered eligible for funds based on the information that has been provided. Yes, your budget will need to be generalized because there are no dates as of now. If we need to formalize that further with specific dates for purchases, we will communicate that with grantees in the future. For larger organizations, should we also show the top of the organization's org chart down to that program? Yes, please do show how the organization flows and the structure of that organization in the flow. And should we include the 20% in the total cost on the application? I am not certain I understand that question in the way that it is worded. Could you possibly reword that question? So yes, you will need to demonstrate the 20% cost, as someone asked a couple questions up. If you are applying for $200,000, you will show that you are providing a 10% match to that to $220,000. And yes, when I say fiscal year, I mean the county's fiscal year, not the organization applying. So the county's fiscal year is from July to June. If there are any other questions in the chat that we haven't captured yet, please repost them. Regarding relevance to the war on drugs, a complex systemic issue with many impacts, is there more specific guidance and criteria? There is not. This is left intentionally vague. We want to see what creative ways people are using to address the impacts of the war on drugs or address the impacts of cannabis criminalization. If you are not an organization,
I'm sorry, Gabby.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to kind of clarify that other question about assisting with understanding the funding priorities. We can answer specific questions. So if you have
Yes.
specific questions that kind of aligns with what submitting your documentation, you can submit those questions to us to the email that Gabby um, gave to you guys in the beginning of the presentation, because we do want to kind of make this a clear and accessible process. So any specific questions we can assist with. We just can't help you with filling out those documentations if that makes things, or if that makes sense.
Thank you. That is a very good clarification. If we are not an organization, do we still create an organizational chart? Yes, I would request that you give us at least a brief understanding of how whatever system you are working under functions in that case. If the business is a foundation subsidiary of a larger organization, is it appropriate or allowed to apply as the subsidiary only? Yes, that should be fine as long as you have your own financials and ability to receive funds from Baltimore County and spend those funds in accordance with the budget you have outlined. And thank you, Bibios, for posting the GRSI grants email in the chat here. That is a good place for folks to send any questions to. Please direct all your questions there. Again, we're going to be posting an FAQs page. We are working on updating that from the first webinar, and we'll be adding to it after this one. The church has a 501c3 under the umbrella of the denomination. Not sure if we have good standing certificate in Maryland because the denomination is based in another state. What is an acceptable document? For now, I would encourage you to look out to your state and see what their equivalent is to SDAT. All states should have a State Department of Assessments and Taxation, and we will work on our end to determine if that will be an acceptable alternative. That would be my recommendation for right now. Reach out to your State Department of Assessments and Taxation. If there is a need to extend the deadline, we can consider that. However, we cannot guarantee that the deadline will be extended at this time. As of right now, the deadline remains March 15th. So this is a great question. All projects should be related to cannabis or any county priority area. Projects do not need to be related to cannabis. They do need to be related to one of the priority areas identified. Again, those are, and let me scroll up here so I can find the document here. Those are mental health and harm reduction, education and after school programs, housing and homeless services or prevention, reentry and reintegration, adult professional development, entrepreneurship and economic development, nonprofit training and management to support BIPOC community leaders, and workforce development and training. If you have a priority area that is not on that list, we encourage you to email us and we can consider that for funding in future years to be included as a priority area. Can funding be used for renovation of a building that will connect to one of the priority areas? Is this acceptable? I would encourage you to fill out your application and really consider how that will connect to and align with those CRRF priorities. We cannot guarantee funding for any specific program at this time. We still got some time here, folks, so please feel free to put in additional questions if you have them. If you are doing this, funding is meant for programs and projects. It is not intended for capital funding. If you have an incredibly strong argument for how capital funds will tie into those priority areas, we can consider that for funding. We cannot guarantee that that will be an eligible expense. A university can apply for funds, and a nonprofit foundation of the university can also apply for funds. Can the funding be used to cover staff going to conferences or professional development and improvement of the programming? Again, folks, we cannot speak to whether or not we are going to fund something in such specifics. That will need to be baked into your application, and we will need to see the argument that you make for how that aligns to our CRRF priority areas. So I encourage you to really look at what you are looking to fund, determine whether or not each facet of what you are looking to fund aligns with those priority areas that are identified. We do not have a list of allowable or unallowable costs at this time. We can talk to people on our team and see if that is something that we can develop. However, I would encourage, as I've said, and I know I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, please look at the priority areas and determine whether or not what you are applying for adequately meets those priority areas. Again, one of the through lines throughout what we are going to be scoring things on is, does your capacity seem sufficient to carry out the project, and does that project adequately align with those priority funding areas? I will add in here just, I think this will encompass some of the overall themes I'm seeing in the questions here, and we appreciate all of the questions. This is a new funding program for Baltimore County and from the state of Maryland. This funding is new. So as we go through this first programmatic year, we expect to learn a lot. If you have things that you would like to be funded, again, in following years, priority areas that you see that you think are not being addressed by this, we really encourage you to reach out to us to also fill out that survey online so that we can make adjustments for funding for the program in future years. Do we have any further questions? All right. Thank you, Bibios. Bibios just posted the survey in the chat, so please feel free to complete that survey. I thank you all for attending. Again, I'll stay on for another minute here if folks have questions, but we'll start to wrap this up and just say thank you all for attending. We really appreciate all of you working on this. We appreciate your interest in this new program, and we are excited to read your proposals for funding. If you have questions, please do send them over to GRSI Grants. We, as I said at the top of this, have people monitoring that email every workday. We are working to get responses back to you as quickly as possible. We will be posting FAQs on the webpage, and we will be posting this webinar as well, both the recording and the slide deck. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate all the work that you do for Baltimore County, and we look forward to reading the proposals that you submit. We can send out, I believe, let me confirm this because I am not the one who set up this webinar. We do have a list of all the folks who registered, correct, Ashley?
We do.
Okay, so yes, we can send out a recording and FAQ to those who registered. That is a great question. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us